Hey there, it's Mike with Office R&D and Jamie with Everything Coworking. We're here today for the second episode of our coworking series focused on helping new operators build their coworking businesses. Over the next couple of weeks, we plan on focusing on a variety of topics that will help operators of all shapes and sizes. Today, we're focusing on choosing your flex location and structuring the real estate deal. Jamie, I'll go ahead and share my screen and let you kick it off, and with that, we can jump into it. Give me one moment.
Okay, great. Mike, it's so good to be back. If you missed our first video, you should definitely go back and have a listen because any decision you make is always related to your ideal community avatar or ICA. So today we're going to talk about what locations are ideal for your ICA. So one thing I want you to always keep in mind is your ICA will travel no more than probably about 20 minutes to get to your space. 15 might be more of a safer radius to keep in mind. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the things you want to consider when you're doing your space search?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you're first choosing your space, it's super important to know your ICA. Some example customers you might see might be like fast growing tech startups looking for office lease, not leases, but office space. They might prefer like more communicative, crowded areas that all of their employees can easily reach. Another potential avatar you might look at is like small businesses. They might look to avoid city centers because they want to be close to where all the people live. And so they might, move some or pick something further away from the city center. Another avatar might be like a freelancer. Freelancers want to work in more cozy suburban spaces where they can focus on deep work. And so it really, really depends what type of customer you're searching for that will help you pick where your space should ultimately go. Another thing, as we move on from the avatar, another thing that's really important is choosing something that's not too far away. While a cheaper location, more remote location might seem appealing, investing in a more convenient location is definitely going to save you money in the end because there's going to be a higher demand for people that want to work there. Another thing to consider is, access to public transit, if it's walkable from neighborhoods or houses. In my experience, heavy traffic and really long commutes can cause very unhappy workers, and it's just going to be harder to get traffic into your space. One way that people do this is by something called a transit and walk score. And essentially that's a score that can be given to your building based on how easy it is to park, based how easy it is to walk. Thinking about space accessibility for non-car owners, again, depending on your ideal customer avatar, is very important, and make sure that you build a space for the persona you're looking for. One other last piece of advice when choosing your location I like to mention is look at what the local competition looks like in that space. It's important to see if there's other co-working spaces nearby, research how they're doing, and by looking at their successes or failures, you can get really much better insight into whether the location is going to be good or bad. So as long as your product offering is unique and compelling enough compared to some of those other local spots, there's good benefit in potentially building a location close to other co-working spaces. Those are some of the things that I think is important when you're first looking or choosing your space. Jamie, do you want to add on to that in terms of size or other factors?
Yeah, Mike, you made some great points, and I think the core advice to keep in mind is always be matching the people you want to serve with what they want to buy, right? This is ultimately a customer acquisition business. You have to get members and your members will turn over. So you want to have the location and the vibe and all the things that Mike talked about that actually match your customer. And to his point, don't skimp and make a lot of trade-offs because then you won't be able to attract your ideal customer. So when you're looking for space, I want you to have a checklist so that you don't get emotional and sort of fall in love with the space that you find that doesn't actually meet your criteria. And then I want you to really think about your real estate structure. If you're a new operator, you're probably going to lease a space, but you do have a few options. You could buy a space. So about 50% of the students who go through my co-working startup school own their building and they've decided they want to run a co-working space out of that building. That can be a really great economic model. So if you're in a smaller market where buying commercial property might be approachable, ask that question, do some research on that, because leasing can have its challenges. Lots of operators lease space, but keep in mind you could buy, you could lease, or eventually you could partner. Now, Mike had a unique situation where he partnered right off the bat as a newer operator. Michael, can you just talk briefly about that experience so people know, what that opportunity is and what that might look like?
Yeah, generally partnering, I had a very unique situation, but generally partnering comes with more experienced operators. Landlords are using partnering as a way to essentially give services or offerings that they might not have a lot of traditional experience selling. Whether it's on-demand amenities, whether it's services, they essentially are outsourcing some of this operations experience to a co-working partner. Typically, this is done through something like a management agreement. In this management agreement, a landlord's going to take on more of the risk, upfront expenses, but instead, they don't have to actually manage that space. The operator takes on less risk because they're not paying up front, but they will be ultimately responsible, for the success of that space. And generally, those work with some sort of profit sharing agreement. Our next episode is actually going to dive much further into partnership agreements that we traditionally see between co-working spaces. So stay tuned and we'll get into that more. But yeah, there's definitely multiple ways that you as an operator can actually choose to structure your entire real estate deal. And it's going to have different economic consequences and more risk depending on which one you choose. So yeah, that's a quick look at choosing your real estate deal. Let me switch slides really quick. Another option that you could potentially do is work with a broker. Brokers generally can help you find a good location that meet your space's needs, and generally they have really extensive local knowledge of an area, of good location, good landlords you can work with, and buildings that might not even be on your radar. They have a vested interest in helping you find a great space, and typically, it just depends, but they receive about 3% of the leasing contract, and that's actually paid by the landlord, as Jamie put here. And yeah, brokers are generally very reliable and will assist you with many of the issues that arise that you might not be aware of. You can obviously work with one of the larger broker houses, JLL, CBRE, Cushman Wakefield, but it might not be a bad idea to find a local broker that's familiar with the flex industry. You potentially can get better rates and just more local specific knowledge working with someone like that instead. Jamie, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, I love that. You should never, ever, ever negotiate a real estate deal if you are not experienced in doing that. Brokers negotiate many, many, many deals every year, and they, understand the mindset of a landlord. They understand what they're looking for, and they also just play an important role in sort of mediating what you want versus what the landlord wants to give. I get very nervous when folks show up to our startup school without a broker, or they're about to sign a lease and they didn't have anybody negotiate that. Landlords will know if you're unrepresented, and you absolutely might get taken advantage of. So keep that in mind. And if we have, landlords listening, the other thing I wanted to mention around the partnership is there are lots of great operators out there to partner with. So feel free to reach out or leave a comment if anybody has any questions or topics they want to go deeper on. We'd love to hear from you. So in terms of your space search, this is kind of flipping back to sort of the physical space. I wanted to make an important point about the business model. And so, as Mike mentioned, it is really helpful if you can work with a broker that understands the business model of co-working. That can be hard to find. Again, we can make a couple recommendations if you want to reach out, because you're really monetizing the square footage. And so you basically want a really simple building, like a rectangle is ideal. If you have a weirdly shaped building, or it has an atrium, it has space that you're essentially paying for but can't monetize. And by monetize, I mean you're putting an office on, in that space, or you're putting, dedicated desks, or you're putting event space. You're making money on that space. If you have a bunch of space in the building that you're not able to really use, but you're paying rent on, that can be really challenging for this business model, and that space may not work for you. So you want to know that when you're looking, even things like how wide are the hallways. can matter a lot in terms of whether you're able to monetize the space. So this is getting into a little bit of nitty gritty, but it's actually really important. And it's a point that a lot of folks just don't know when they're looking for a space. So you want to keep that in mind. We call it efficiency. You want a really efficient space, and you want to be able to monetize at least 80% of the space. Other things that can play into that besides an atrium are even restrooms. So are there shared restrooms that are pretty, efficiently laid out and shared by other tenants? Or do you have to have restrooms, in your space? You're definitely not making money on the restroom. So just one of those little things that can actually make a big difference if your why, which we talked about in video 1, is to kind of maximize profitability. So definitely keep that in mind. Michael,
that's
anything else you would add there? Yeah.
Yeah, that not a lot of people are probably thinking about when they're going through these deals. So that's a really, really good point.
So speaking of deals, again, we're kind of focusing on real estate deals in this video. If you should always look at more than one space. So if you're leasing or buying, you want to compare the options that are in your market and line them up with your ideal customer avatar, your profit goals, the right location, all the search criteria that we talked about. And you also want to be careful to compare the actual real estate deal. And this is something that your broker would hopefully help you do. And if not, you want to have somebody sort of, on your team that can help you analyze and compare deals, because you're going to get terms from the landlord. You're going to get rent abatement, you're going to get tenant improvement allowances, and then there's going to be, rent that you're paying. There might be additional fees like common area and maintenance. Some markets have real estate taxes. So you want to be able to look at what is this deal costing you over the length of your lease, and compare that option to another option in your market. So if your why is, profiting on the space over, say, 5 or 10 years, you want to understand, okay, if I put my business in this location, this is how much I can make, and this is how much it's going to cost me over that length of time compared to another option. And you want to be careful when you do that, because there could just be sort of misperceptions without really running the numbers and comparing the deals. So keep that in mind when you're building out your pro forma and considering a location.
Awesome. Well, Jamie, thank you so much. That actually wraps up our episode today on choosing a location and structuring a real estate deal. As always, Jamie, thank you so much for your time today and always providing such valuable insight. We will be back soon with this special episode for landlords actually interested in getting into co-working. We also should have some helpful tips for operators as well. Until next time, have a great day and happy co-working.